What's up, everyone? Welcome to Perceptionist Anonymous. My name is Christy Ann. You guys, it's been, I know, I took a little time off the last couple weeks over the Thanksgiving holiday, and I hope that you guys really had the chance to enjoy your holiday and have good time to spend with your family. If you do, in fact, celebrate this holiday, I know a lot of my listeners are in Australia and New Zealand as well, and I'm so excited. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to my show. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate being able to have this outlet and just doing my thing. That's all. Um, so, with that being said, yeah, I took some time to go up to Seattle, and I was able to meet my best friend's baby and see her after, gosh, not seeing her for more than an hour, maybe over the last 5 years or something like that. So that was really nice, and it was really nice to get out of town and just, kind of decompress a little bit. Um, what I want to do today is a little bit different than what we've been focusing on over the last couple weeks. So over the last two episodes, I wanted to discuss the idea of patriarchy and sort of this essentially the history of women's rights in a way. And I'm really building up to this really progressed coverage of civil rights and in the United States as well as the rest of the world, but I just find it so absolutely fascinating. And I think that, for myself, I find that our millennial generation, or my millennial generation, tends to is very reminiscent of the attitude of the generation of the 60s, people in their 20s during the 60s, and just this fight for equality in different areas and this really strong desire to change the world, and areas that are very evident in which we see the world needs to change, or that we hope that it would change. And so I know that for myself it's something I've really resonated with, and I'm excited to kind of do a more in-depth research of that. However, I'm doing something different today. I hope that this eclipse season has been treating you guys well. And for myself, I know that I'm not going to lie, it's been pretty difficult for me. I've been really kind of on an emotional roller coaster in a way, and I've been really being shown parts of myself that I need to work through. Today is actually December 6th, and it is actually to the day the last month of my 20s. And anyone that knows me knows that I talk about this a lot. I find it really important to me, and I'm really excited for the next step of moving into my 30s, and I'm really proud of all the areas of my life that I've been able to progress since the beginning of my 20s. And that'll be an episode for another time that's not necessarily interesting to you guys, but to me, I'm fascinated by it. I'm kind of obsessed with it. So, with that being said, I have been working through a lot of self reflection and self intervention, and reaching out for help in different areas from people and from organizations to try and just really get my head on straight, and get my heart on straight, and get my feet flat on the ground so I can feel the most grounded that I can, and to be the best version of myself that I can. And today I want to talk about borderline personality disorder. Anyone that knows me knows that this is a topic that is very close to my heart. It is something that I have experienced firsthand, both through my own experience as well as those, as well as family members of mine. I was diagnosed with borderline personality traits at 12 years old, and then again at 26. At 12, I wasn't able to necessarily receive uh, an in-depth prognosis or a diagnosis, because I was so young, and with your hormones at that time, my hormones were all over the place, and I was all over the place, and I actually just had a really hard time adjusting to my hormones. And then at the age of 26, I was kind of going through obviously a very different point in my life, and I was living in Arkansas, and I started seeing a therapist out there. And I went in, with my background in psychology, my bachelor's degree in psychology, and then also having been in treatment since I was 12 off and on, I was very familiar with the idea of borderline personality disorder. And I went into this counselor and I said, I need help. I need help with this. I'm experiencing this. And, she's like, oh, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I think you have complex post-traumatic stress. And I was like, wow, I've never heard of that before. And that's actually an episode for another time. I'd really love to get a specialist on to discuss that, because CPTSD I'm so happy to be seeing it in like everyday kind of conversations, and like this is definitely something that is becoming more of a frontline conversation. But when I came across it, I did research on it afterwards, and I was just so blown away and so kind of relieved by some of the things it talked about. But when I went in to see this therapist, she's like, "No, I don't think you have BPD. I think you have CPTSD." And it's, we can have all these terms and acronyms and freaking boxes and all these things, but some people talk down to the idea of having a diagnosis, and I think in some ways it can really help because it shows like a sort of series of gathered information that we can use to self reflect on, but it's obviously helpful to not just overly identify with these terms. And we can get so hung up on, oh, I got ADHD. Oh, I'm neurodivergent. Oh, I'm CPTSD. No, just regular PTSD. Oh, no, just kidding. I have an attachment disorder. And it's like, I have probably a little bit all of those things, as, we all do kind of to some degree. So, anyway, I'm at this therapist and I brought it up to her. She's like, "No, I don't think so." And then after the course of a couple weeks, she's like, "So with your degree in psychology, your background in psychology, I'm sure you're familiar with borderline personality disorder." And I was like, "That is literally why I came in." Like, she's like, "Yeah, no, okay, I see it now." And I have not been diagnosed with a full-blown disorder, and so while I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical professional. However, I am someone that has studied this for over 10 years, probably 15 years. I've been just trying to understand this from the inside perspective as well as from the outside perspective. And what I want to do today is sort of just give you guys an inside account of what some of these aspects and characteristics of this diagnosis can be portrayed as, or what it's likely to manifest as, and what it's like to just be to experience these things. Particularly, I want to put out this episode for anyone that feels like they might be struggling with similar issues. A lot of the time, it's my interpretation and my experience that borderline personality disorder is like a series. There's a mental component, which I'll get into, or like a physiological component that I'll talk about directly here in just a moment. But I found that a lot of it is just these really kind of sad coping techniques and these survival techniques that have kind of gathered to create a cohesive sort of dysfunction in how we relate to other people. And it's a trip, and I'm sure that at least to some extent everything that I talk about today will be, relatable to most people, especially for those of us in the spirituality realm or in the mental health realm or in the, personal development, anything. We all know, like, what, like 3/4 of the population has like an attachment issue. There's 25% of people that have a secured attachment. The rest of us are kind of like, iffy. Some days are better than others, I think. And then CPTSD being this complex post-traumatic stress, this like elongated experience of distress, probably during childhood, where it sort of trains your brain to react to things in a very particular unhealthy way, and you have to do your best to break out of it. But some people, there's a lot of characteristics that are very specific to CPTSD, and once again, that'll be an episode for another time because I really want to dedicate time to that. I don't want to just kind of skip over it a little bit right now. Anyway, so my aim for this episode is to just be an advocate for BPD. I am very lucky and very grateful that over the course of 15 years and over the course of my entire life, I've been really self-aware, and so I've been able to sort of recognize my behaviors, recognize the behaviors of others, recognize where some things are really unhealthy, or like my childhood, like realizing at a very young age that I was in a situation that was really not normal, and really like I could see where I was being manipulated in some areas. And then as I got older, while I still really struggle with certain aspects like emotional instability and some other mental disturbances or perceptual disturbances, I was able to recognize at a young age that how I was thinking about things and relating to other people wasn't necessarily normal or common. I hate using the word normal like most people, but I like to replace the word normal with common and or healthy, And so I just want to say that while I have not been debilitated by this diagnosis, a lot of people that do have it can be. And I think A lot of it just depends on our sensitivity to things and our ability to be self-aware and our ability to sort of see this bigger picture, and then also to maintain consistent restructuring of our brains. It's literally like an everyday battle, focusing on like trying to retrain our brains to not just automatically react in the way that we'd like to react. And so, anyway, so let's go into some of the aspects of BPD. So, BPD, borderline personality disorder. What this is, the history of borderline personality disorder, the term was coined by a psychoanalyst named Otto Kernberg in 1938. And he said that to him and to his colleagues, essentially, that the borderline was named so because it was said to be a borderline of schizophrenia. He said that people with this disorder have a tendency to regress into borderline schizophrenia in certain situations, which I find, I mean, that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, but once again, I have my own, maybe I'm just really not as affected by it, and my heart goes out to those that do struggle with this more. In the 70s, we began to have a deeper understanding of what this is, and even up until very recently, I mean, the DSM-5 came out maybe 10 years ago, and even just now are we starting to have a more cohesive idea of how this works with the brain, and we don't even, I mean, there's not one single thing that creates and instigates borderline personality disorder in a person. It's kind of like a series of unfortunate events in addition to like synaptic hormonal vulnerabilities to it. And so the term borderline, they said it was these people seemed to show that they sort of walked the line between psychosis and neurosis. And at this time, when the name was coined, psychosis was seen as incurable and intreatable, whereas neurosis was seen as, a good prognosis, a good way of being treated, and potentially curable. And so they said that people that fall into this personality disorder, that was it. Like, and often up until very recently, people with borderline personality disorder were thought to have no good prognosis. Like, they were said that if you have this, like, you're going to have this the rest of your life. And to some extent, I believe that we will. I mean, like I said, I've been working on myself my whole life, like, very, like, cognitively. I've been very aware of these things that I've been trying to work on, and a lot of the behavioral traits have subsided, which tends to happen as you get older. And I'm going to go into the characteristics of BPD here in just a moment, so I don't want to just talk about my experience. But so the behavioral sort of chaos tends to subside as you get older, and they say that about the age 30, we start really seeing a pattern in our behavior, and things start like kind of calming down a little bit. However, the emotional instability, the affective instability, tends to maintain consistent over our lives, and that is the primary issue with BPD, is that it's like, it's still an everyday battle. It just, some things get easier, and you just are able to develop better coping skills to deal with these, these roller coaster thoughts and these roller coaster emotions. So, that's a whole thing. So, yeah, anyway, in 1938, Otto Kernberg defined borderline as the middle level of personality organization between psychosis and neurosis. They say that people with BPD were described as having primitive psychological defenses such as splitting and projective identification. It soon became more evident that this disorder showed symptoms of unstable self-image, rapidly fluctuating mood swings, a fear of abandonment, strong tendency for both self-harm and suicidal thinking. And so it's in 1980 that the BPD actually became an official personality disorder in the DSM-3, it appears. So with that being said, those are the primary components of the disorder. So the unstable self-image, which I'll get into, and what I want to do is I just want to share my experience. And while anyone that's listened to this show for a long time, they realize that this is like a pretty public therapy session for myself as well. I am really honest with my experiences, and I'm really honest with how I feel about things. And this is one particular area that's very close to my heart, and that I am so grateful that I'm able to be a voice, be like a good intermediary voice for people with this, to help other people without the disorder understand what it's like to live with it. Um, so anyway, yeah, right on. So fear of abandonment, rapidly fluctuating mood swings. Those are like two, in addition to the tendency for self-harm and suicidal thinking. So self-harm is sort of like the dog whistle for BPD. So like, and I've heard this said before that as soon as someone goes into therapy and they are exhibiting self-harm, like BPD is the very first thing that comes up. It could be depression. However, a lot of the times it's not just this alleviation like the people use for cutting or whatever, burning, or just any of these things that may be triggering to other people to hear. So I'm sorry if that's if you're a healing cutter or anything, and it might be hard for you to think about this. But it's essentially like you could do these things as a reaction to depression or a reaction to like a dissociation where you don't feel anything and you just want to feel something. But oftentimes it is for attention. Oftentimes it is for a release out of your own experience of overwhelming emotion, which is why I used it when I was younger. I mean, once again, anyone that knows me knows that I was hospitalized quite a few times between the age of 12 to 16. I spent an 8-month stint and then a 4-month stint in a long-term adolescent treatment center up in Reno, Nevada. And then I also had a bunch, probably 5 short-term, like week-long hospitalizations. And oftentimes, I'm not going to lie, I put myself in a situation to get out of where I was living as a kid. And I just, my situation was a little bit different. I was a bit over exaggerative because I did need the attention. I had suffered from emotional neglect my entire childhood, and this is something that every day is like a new layer of this experience being peeled back, and every day is a new experience of me being like, oh my God, like that's why I do that. Oh my God. Or, like trying to get to the point where you can trust your own judgment, trust your own feelings, even getting to the point where you recognize where you don't like something or do like something. Like those are really strong symptoms of childhood and emotional neglect, where you have separated yourself from your emotions. So anyway, with this experience of mine, it's just every day I find a new layer to it. In my young adolescent time, I had a lot of trouble. And I think that around the age of 12 is when most people, like, if you're going to start developing some emotional instability, that's around the time that it happens. And at the age of 12, that's when I started cutting. And while it was only such a small period of my life, from 12 to 15, I went for it, man. And it was, I received a lot of help for it, and it's definitely not something that I've done since. However, I can tell you that there have been a couple times in my adult life where I'll have under CEAP, complex post-traumatic stress. We can have what are called emotional flashbacks, and there have been times in my recent life where I've become so overwhelmed by what's going on inside my head, and that it's hard for me to separate what's actually occurring in my, just like me that day at my house with my partner or at work or whatever, and then from what's happening inside of me, which is like this total whirlwind of rejection and abandonment and like hyperventilation and panic. It's like a freaking panic attack, and you almost can't tell what's happening in your life as it's occurring, because you're just having a flashback. Like something else is happening to you while you're sitting in the bathroom crying. Like you are emotionally somewhere else. You're emotionally experiencing some other trauma that is being forwarded and replayed to your daily life. So anyway, where was I going with that? So I guess just with my experience, the self-harm thing. So self-harm and suicidal thinking or suicidal ideation, or like, threatening to commit suicide or any of these things, those are really well-known components of BPD that kind of lead a doctor to start thinking about that diagnosis as soon as it gets brought up. The other really prominent aspects are the unstable self-image, and I'll go ahead and give my experience of what that is, because that's still something I'm trying to understand. And I think the fact that I can't quite put my finger on it is kind of a symptom of that I have it. Like if I I think of unstable self image and I think of, okay, so who am I and how am I stable or unstable? And the fact that I am struggling to even see that inside of myself kind of shows that there is this issue with my self image, like with an issue of me recognizing the consistent parts of myself because I do see that they change so often. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean by consistent? Like, I was like, oh, you mean like every day? Like, what parts of me are the same every day? I don't know. I basically live moment to moment, and my days are sort of spirals. God, I'm using so many hand motions, you guys. I should be videotaping this. I'm like pretty blown away by myself right now. Um, my days through my experience, I don't necessarily see like full days when I look back at my week. What I see is events, and I see emotions, and I see like there's certain things that I remember. There's certain things that were good that I remember, but there's definitely things that like tones of voice people gave me, little slights of word that were told to me that I that hurt my feelings or anything, or that I still haven't quite figured out. I need to ruminate a little more on. That's a big issue of BPD. I would say is this like sort of rumination on the actions of other people or on their tones of voice or on any sort of thing that will potentially trigger you to feel like you're being rejected in some way or you're being mistreated in some way. Um, and so with the unstable self image, I'm like, okay, so what characteristics are the same for me every day? It's like, I don't know. I tend to see just like event and then event, as opposed to like day. Like, oh yeah, that day was good. It was like, okay, well, what happened to that day? And it's sort of broken down into much finer detail, which can tend to be really overwhelming. I know that this is something that I'm really trying to work on is shifting my focus from being so micro focused to being more macro big picture focused because I get so wrapped up in the details that I can't even see that we had a good day because all I can think about is my partner having that little bit of an attitude and rolling his eyes or like maybe he didn't even roll his eyes, man. It's just like I thought maybe. And then because of that, it's like we take it and we run with it. And that is the thing that, I'm it's been nice to redo some really clinical research onto this topic instead of just like experiencing it, because I think this is something, you guys, I have studied borderline personality disorder for as long as I can remember to try and understand myself. And, and I feel like I'd like to say that I'm a good authority on this topic, and maybe that'll kind of lend to why I'm all over the place when I do these shows. It took me so long to do this show today, you guys. I have been, like I said, my emotions have been pretty, up in the air. I've got some strong personal stuff that I'm working through, in addition to all the, energetic, spiritual stuff that's occurring and transitions there. And then, and I don't know, it took me a really long time to put this episode out, and I think I cleaned my entire house, and I accomplished so much because I was like putting off doing this episode, even though I know so much about it. So I don't know, just bear with me here, you guys. I really appreciate to be here with you today. Okay, so unstable self-image and then rapidly fluctuating mood swings. That is like for me, that is probably the biggest issue that I deal with is like how quickly we can go from 0 to 100. And I think for me, what occurs is that all these details that I talked about before, like all the details of our day-to-day life, all the details of our interactions with people, all the details of our life, they build up. They build up. And it's like we just kind of explode, man. Instead of being able to really express our needs maybe to our partners, a lot of the time where this shows up is in our romantic relationships. It can show up in our platonic and work or anything related relationships as well, and that is actually what differentiates borderline traits from a borderline personality disorder, is because with a disorder it affects every area of your life, and it is a sort of consistent inconsistency essentially. But with traits, it doesn't have to show up in every area of your life. It can just affect some areas more than others, and it's in my romantic relationships that I struggle the most. I have no idea how honest this episode's going to get about my experience, but let's go for it, guys. So with me, my rapidly fluctuating mood swings, that is a thing. I can just it's like a switch that'll get flipped if we feel like something is off, or if we, I don't know, it can be a lot of things, but it's something that I definitely have to be very aware of because I'm having to, some days are better than others, and then some relationships are better than others, and it all kind of depends on the context of what's occurring, and also, like, if I'm on my cycle or something, that I realize that I have to be very careful because I can be very reactive, and that's what it is this rapid reaction to things that we think are happening, and sometimes they are happening, and that's what makes it difficult too, is that, like, we think we're being abandoned because we have been abandoned, and it even happens, like, with, like, our partner may not even know that they're abandoning us, but we know that they're not paying enough attention to us, or we feel like they're not paying enough attention to us, or we feel like their tone of voice was unempathetic, or we feel like they don't hear our concerns. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of things that can trigger these mood swings, and then also these mood swings can go back to good too. They're not necessarily just from, like, really good to really bad. A lot of the time, what differentiates borderline personality disorder from bipolar disorder is the fact that our mood swings do occur so quickly, as opposed to with bipolar disorder. Those moods tend to last days, and they're more of a biochemical effect as opposed to, like, an intrapersonal effect that occurs with BPD. So there's this saying that there's no personality disorder if you're by yourself. And there's different personality disorders, so I'm just going to stick to talking about BPD right now, because, essentially, if you are by yourself, and if you have always been by yourself, then you don't have a relationship. I mean, good, bad, any of it. You don't have anything to have this crazy reflection back at, as opposed to, like, bipolar disorder. If you grew up without people around you and you had bipolar disorder, you would have that. Like, that is something that occurs from the hormones and the neurochemicals in your body and your brain. That happens regardless of whether or not of anything that you've experienced. However, with BPD, it often stems from a prolonged stressful childhood and a certain biochemical susceptibility to certain things. And so I know that, like, I've been by myself all week, and I am doing well. I feel like I finally have been able to take a breath and to relax and to decompress a bit. However, when I'm back with my partner, it's going to be a little bit different. And I have to remind myself, like, okay, this is where it shows up. Like, even if I'm not in a relationship, I can go to work every day and I can maintain a good job, which some people with BPD can't. Some people, like, this can really be a debilitating diagnosis. It can be a really debilitating disorder. And my heart goes out to those people. Some areas, like I said, are worse than others. And for me, it's my romantic situations that I see all the details because I'm so hyper vigilant, and I struggle with seeing the bigger picture that, like, just whatever the bigger picture would be at the time. Anyway, so the unstable self-image, rapidly fluctuating mood swings, fear of abandonment, and the tendency for self-harm. Those are sort of the biggest components that people started to see when they started to create the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. Secondarily, I wanted to talk about the components that make up the BPD, or some of the concepts or the causes of it. So first off, let's talk about genetics. You may be more vulnerable to BPD if you have a close family member that lives with BPD. There is no evidence, though, of a particular gene that is responsible for it. This is from rethink.org. So Rethink Mental Illness. And I'm going to be posting my sources for all of this stuff. And so I'm basically just going to be bouncing my ideas off of what I'm reading and then giving you my personal experience to be sort of an advocate in a way, or to give, like, a really personalized approach to what this is like, because there's it's so easy to look at paperwork and look at, all this clinical research and stuff of what BPD is on paper, but every person's different, and every person's manifestation of BPD can be different, and they actually say that there's 4 types of BPD, and I'm kind of just remembering that right now. I forgot to do research on that in order to bring that up to you. So this might be like a 2 freaking episode show. Yeah, I'm already at half an hour of recording. Yes, this is going to be a 2-episode show. Okay, so genetics, so there is no particular like specific component genetically that people can say that if they look at that they can tell like, oh my god, this person's going to grow up to develop BPD. It's more like a soup of predispositions, like you are naturally overly sensitive, or you're naturally sensitive, overly sensitive, whatever. You're naturally sensitive. You have high levels of natural cortisol. Your amygdala is overactive. You have smaller parts of your brain here and there. So there's different things that sort of lend to a susceptibility to developing this diagnosis. The second is the brain chemicals. So things like dopamine and serotonin don't work properly in someone with someone with BPD. So not only do we have like the fact that there is a high probability of you developing it if someone in your first degree family member has it, and that's actually if you have a first degree family member like a father or a sister that has borderline personality disorder, you are 4 to 20 times more likely to get it. They say you're 10 times more likely to have it as well. And so that could lend to a theoretical or a potential genetic component, but it also could just mean like the same way that attachment disorders are passed down from generation to generation. It has to kind of do with like you have these sort of genetic susceptibilities, and then you have the environment that creates this like really perfect situation for you to just be sad all the time, you know? Or like this, the perfect bad environment to the perfect bad brain chemistry, and then you got it. You got it, and your family's got it, and it's a thing. So, but not all the time. Not all the time. Not everyone that has borderline personality disorder has a trauma in their childhood. However, everyone with complex post-traumatic stress does have a trauma from their childhood, and they often manifest very similarly, if not identically, and they can often overlap as well. So, brain chemicals, so your serotonin and dopamine don't exactly work properly. Your brain development is different as well. They say that people that live with borderline personality disorder have smaller or more active parts of their brain. These parts of the brain are affected by your early upbringing and can affect the regulation of your emotions, behavior, and self-control. They can also affect you planning and decision making, which is like hard. Like my planning, you guys, the effort I put into this show is kind of a lot because it takes me so long to like plan something, to gather enough information that I feel like I can like bebop my way around it and kind of like shoot the shit with myself on here. And then decision making, it's like if you lack this total consistency in yourself, then how it's so hard to make a decision because you don't know how you're going to react, how you're going to feel that day that this decision like comes up. And also it's like, what about all the details that goes into each decision? What about all the details that goes into each theoretical solution or theoretical decision? It's so much. It's like it's a really heady diagnosis because there's just so much detail, and it builds up, and I believe that's a lot of what can cause this emotional reactivity is because we can't properly decompress. Anyway, so the other part would be the environmental factors. So a number of environmental factors seem to be common in people with BPD. These include experiencing abuse, often sexual abuse, but it could be physical abuse or anything. Long-term fear or distress as a child, so long-term series of like neglect. I guess in my case, I don't know what, I mean, it could be anything. Like some kids are really sensitive. Like if your parent made you eat the same food that you hated your whole childhood, like that could cause distress. That'd be, that could happen essentially. Also, being neglected by one or both of your caregivers as a child. This is what I experienced, and I think that, we can be raised by people and they can go so far out of their way to make sure that all of our physical needs are met, but that there's this like super lacking emotional connectivity or emotional support that can lend to a perfect environment for you to develop these characteristics of BPD. Also, growing up with a family member who has had a serious mental health condition, such as bipolar disorder or someone with alcohol or drug issues. And so it's all of these things kind of create the perfect soup as to how someone will develop borderline personality disorder. and it's, it is what it is. And I think, once again, every person's experience is different, and not everyone is going to be as affected in the same way. And also, because there are like 9 characteristics and you have to meet 5 of the characteristics in order for you to have a diagnosis, like those 5 out of 9 can show up in hundreds of ways. Like, you can have, I mean, you can even be you can even meet someone with the diagnosis that has the same sort of 5 that you have, and then those will show up in different ways as well. And so it's one reason that this diagnosis has been so stigmatized, is because people, it's overwhelming. It's a lot, especially because science and clinicians don't exactly understand how it's caused yet, so they don't know, like, it's all just, it's just a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot for people trying to frickin' live with it, and it's a lot for people that are trying to survive it and survive with someone with it. So, I want to talk about the characteristics of it now, so the symptoms. And so, out of all these symptoms, they say for a proper diagnosis there have to be 5, and this is actually according to the DSM-5 as well, and the DSM-5 is the most recent diagnostic manual for mental illness. And while I was under the assumption that the diagnosis criteria had changed from the DSM's 3 through 4, but apparently it's just been elaborated on a little bit more. So you have to meet 5 or more of these characteristics to have a certified disorder, as opposed to like just traits like I do. And then there's additional components that tend to coexist or are comorbid to the disorder as well. So let's talk about these. Let's talk about these symptoms. So this is from BetterHelp.com. Anyone knows BetterHelp knows how you can receive counseling through this, and it's a really very helpful resource. And I'll post my resource to this as well. Number 1, distressed efforts to keep away from true or imagined abandonment. I'm going to go through and just read all of these and then go back and kind of talk about the ones that I've experienced, so I can give you guys an idea of what it's like. A form of unstable and extreme interpersonal relations, described as alternating between extremes of devaluation and idealization. Number 3, identity disturbance, significantly and relentlessly unstable self-image. 4, impulsive behavior patterns in at least 2 aspects that are possibly self-damaging: substance abuse, sex, spending, binge eating, or reckless driving. 5, reoccurring suicidal patterns, threats, gestures, or self-harming behavior. 6, affective instability because of a significant reactivity in mood. Irritability, anxiety, and intense episodic dysphoria are typically last a few hours and rarely more than a few days. 7, chronic empty feelings of emptiness. 8, misplaced and intense anger or trouble controlling anger. You're always feeling temperamental. And 9, short-lived stress-related paranoid thoughts or extreme dissociative symptoms. So, as you can see here, like those all, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot. And to have 5, I mean, if you have one of these, like, that affects your life, but to have 5 of these, like, you guys can imagine what it's like to be living inside of a body it reacts, and then you're just kind of at the mercy of your reactivity. Like, it's so hard to be able to get control over some of these aspects of your life when they just are so overwhelming. There's this saying that a person with borderline personality disorder is like an emotional, it's like emotionally having third-degree burns all over your body. So anytime a gust of wind brushes you or someone touches you, you essentially bleed to death. And that's kind of what it's like. It's like any sort of slight that you perceive from another person, it can just totally affect your day. It can totally affect your day. There are things, it's so hard to learn to let things go too. And it's like, the thing with BPD is this idea of splitting, is that you can have this black and white thinking, or you can have this sort of rubber band thinking that goes from feeling one way to feeling the opposite way, and then it'll just like judgment call, it'll just snap back and forth, and it can be extremely, I mean, it's so difficult. I know that for myself, I've been in romantic relationships or situations where I'm totally convinced that it's not right, like the relationship's not right for me. it's the person is abusive or they are, whatever, like whatever's going wrong. And I'll just feel totally empowered and totally secure in my decision after, hours and hours of like ruminating and trying to figure out whether I'm doing is right or not, or if I'm just being crazy or something. And then they will come home and they'll be really loving, and then I'll like question everything, and then it'll swing back to me just really being like, no, I really want to marry this person, I really want to make it work with them. And then it's like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I don't know if I would necessarily say that I resonate with the idea of idolization and devaluation. However, I do struggle with this back and forth between this person's not right for me, and then, oh my God, I have a lot of issues I need to work through. I want to be there for them to work through their issues as well. And it's kind of this back and forth, and it's like whiplash. It's whiplash for me, it's whiplash for them. And it can be really difficult. The same thing goes with these identity disturbances, this like unstable self image. While, being my age now, being 29, 30, I've gone through a lot, and I can say that I've really developed my strengths in a lot of ways, and I still have, I see what some of my reoccurring weaknesses are, and I have much more of a stable personal self. However, I still really struggle with trying to figure out what it is I want to do with my life, and I am trying to figure out whether or not that's just because of the day and age we live in, or if it's just like how all of the people my age feel, or whether it's just me and I'm just off somehow. It's like one day I want to do something and I'll like really want to do it and I'll invest in it, and then the next day it'll just slowly fade. And if I don't act on it, like, how many books I've wanted to write, how many articles I've wanted to write, and if I don't do it while I'm totally in the throes of being excited about it, like it goes away, and then it's gone. And then it's gone, and then I'm like, well, now what do I want to do? And that could be like an ADHD trait. They say, all these people on TikTok, they say, it seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of people's lives. So, who knows, whatever. But this unstable self-image, like, that can be really difficult if you don't know who you want to become, if you don't know what goals you want to set for yourself, or like oftentimes this feeling of emptiness, this chronic feeling of emptiness that occurs in BPD relates directly back to that idea that nothing, I don't know what I want to do. Even to this day, like I am trying so hard to stay consistent with this podcast and to stay consistent with progressing in my romantic relationship, in my spiritual relationship, in my work relationship. Like, I'm trying so hard to stay consistent and to keep pushing, but some days it's like none of it matters. None of it matters. Nothing. I keep trying to create meaning and create emotional attachment in certain areas of my life, and sometimes it's like putting on a facade. Not a facade, that's not a good way to put it. It's like trying to create an attachment, create feelings of deep meaning when you don't necessarily know if you have them or not. You don't even know if you have them or if you don't have them. It's like this disconnect where you can't quite put your finger on whether or not you feel something or not. Man, this is like pretty awakening to hear myself even talk about this. I don't think that these are things that I've said out loud in this way. It's kind of like like I said, a really public therapy session. You're welcome. You're welcome, guys. All right, what else can I talk about? So, a form of unstable or extreme interpersonal relation, alternating between devaluation and idealization. Yeah, once again, that's like, I should break up with this person, they're not working, it doesn't work, they're not good for me, and then the next day be like, no, I really just have issues and I really need to get control of myself, I really want to be with this person, I want to work through it with them. So it's like this back and forth. And that also can relate to this first symptom of true or imagined abandonment. So abandonment doesn't necessarily mean, at least in my experience, that someone is like, that like the person I live with, my romantic partner I live with, is going to leave me, but it's more like I needed a hug when I was upset and they actively chose to not hug me. That's abandonment, or that feels like abandonment or rejection. Or, I asked them if they wanted dinner and they said they weren't hungry. That's abandonment. And then becomes all of these other levels of trust issues like, well, why aren't they hungry? Why don't they want to hug me? Why don't any of these things? Like, everything is so much more complicated with this disorder, because it's so murky and everything is so uncertain, and it's almost like we struggle to see other people as full, whole, cohesive people, and we see them as interactions and situations and details. So it's like, instead of looking at my partner or my friends, I see all of these different interactions we have. Like, the relationship is only as good as the last interaction we have. And for some of us that are really self-aware, this can really weigh on us, because for myself, I'll get stuck in trying to put together a narrative to relate and correlate all the last experiences I had with this person to create like a cohesive whole. Like, okay, so this person, but it's like we focus on the bad. We focus on the bad. We're so hyper vigilant and so aware of when the freaking energy in the room changes. We can feel a change in the energy in the room. The slightest wind, and it can be devastating. Sometimes your partner doesn't even know they're doing it. Or if they do, and then you're like, oh my god, is this person abusing me? Is this person like manipulating me? And then that's a whole other realm, as people with borderline personality disorder tend to choose people that manifest the same issues that our parents gave us or that our parents had. We tend to choose emotionally unavailable people that that validate these feelings and continuously re-trigger these feelings in us. So it's like, yeah, we have these issues, we have these like stress induced paranoid feelings that someone's manipulating us, and then we tend to choose people that manipulate us. So it's like, fuck, man, it's a mess. It's really deep, heavy water to swim through every day. And I think that if anyone is listening that struggles with this, you guys, what we have to do is we have to see the bigger picture, and we have to allow some of this stuff to happen, and to not grasp on to every little detail that might validate to us that something's wrong. You know what? It's like, we have to surrender to the bigger picture that in reality, everything's okay. In reality, we are very lucky to be alive. We're very lucky to have friendships. We're very lucky to have anything that we do have. And that is where we need to focus our attention, instead of being so hyper vigilant that someone's going to hurt us, and then we end up creating that hurt because we're so freaked out that it's occurring, and sometimes the other person just doesn't even know. It's a mess. It's a trip. What's another one? Yeah, reoccurring suicidal patterns, threats, self-harming. When I was younger, like I said, that was a big thing that I did, and a lot of it was for attention, because I received so little attention as a child. I received so little affection and support, like, and bless my family's heart. Like, I was raised by my grandmother and my uncle, and they made sure that my physical needs were met. However, I don't think I don't think I ever even received like hugs or anything when I was a kid. Like, we weren't allowed to really play. We weren't allowed to play during the daytime because my family slept during the day, so we had to be very quiet and we had to be very careful, and that really had an effect on me. And so when I turned 12, and from 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I was like this raging. I was really angry. And a lot of where borderline's emotions come from is this overwhelming anger that we never received the love that we know that we should have in some way. And then we internalize it by thinking the next step is, okay, well, obviously I didn't deserve it. Like, if I would be promised something and then it wouldn't happen, or my dad or something wouldn't show up, or someone wouldn't show up, or they wouldn't follow through with something, I internalized it by being like, my 9-10-year-old self would be like, obviously I don't deserve it. Obviously I am not worthy of going to the frickin' park or anything like that, And it's just, it can be so overwhelming and it still affects me. But I think like now I've gotten to the point where I'm not, I mean, I'm still, I deal with a lot of anger issues around it still. If I feel like I'm being mistreated in some way, I have to be very careful that I am upfront to the person in a healthy way and to not make them defensive, because that can happen. Is we have such fine-tuned ability to read into someone else's negative emotion that we often determine neutral emotion as negative emotion. And that is something that I saw in my research, is this idea of mind reading, that borderlines will mind read and will often you finish each other's sentences too, or finish someone else's sentences too, which I struggle with. I realize as I've gotten older, I accidentally talk over people, and if I've done that to anyone that's listening, I'm so sorry. So sorry. I catch myself do it, and I'm just like, dude, we never used to do that. Where did this come from? So this idea of mind reading is we can see a neutral emotion on someone's face, and we will determine it as a negative emotion. We can see a good emotion, and we can kind of recognize that good emotion too, and then we can see so many more shades of bad emotion. Like we can so easily read into someone's negative emotion that we are extremely empathetic in that way, but we're not empathetic or empathic in the way that we can read people's neutral to good emotions better. We often will automatically take a theoretical impression that we got from someone and we'll run with it. We'll be like, yeah, my partner didn't call me to say good night. That must mean this, or this. And it's like, while your partner not calling you to say goodnight can really, I mean, like that, you're allowed to have your feelings hurt by that. You're allowed for that to be something that you like wished they wouldn't do, especially if this is something that you've mentioned to them. However, there's no way we're going to know why they didn't call. And that's the thing too, is like these ideas of imagined and perceived fears of or these fear of abandonment, or this imagined abandonment, because we'll take something that has happened and we'll assume it means all of these other things, which are often worst case scenario. It really is. We can just, we see a rock at the bottom of a lake and we'll just keep swimming until we run out of breath, and then we'll just die because, I don't know, we just couldn't let the rock go. Like we had to get the rock or something. Affective instability, really significant reactivity and mood. That is something that I struggle with here. It's like this level of irritability, and I often find that it can come from just being having pent up emotion is a lot of what it is. Pent up emotion and taking everything personally. Like this idea that what did I write down? So this paranoid ideation that we feel like others have negative intentions towards us, and that is because we take things personally. We assume that all people's actions are a symptom of something having to do with us, as opposed to just something that they're going through. And so this, for some people, this can be taken really, really far. And during some of my worst moods or worst points of my life, this could happen. I would just, I could become really overwhelmed by an inability to separate from what I am afraid is happening and then feeling like it is happening. And it's a trip. I mean, it can be really unfortunate. And so all of these things like lend to us being on edge a lot. And that's because it's a trauma response. It's a survival response. So we're always waiting for something to happen. And so it's like we're so micromanaging that we see all of these things that our partner did or didn't do, and then they just build up, and so it makes us like irritable, high-strung people, and it sucks because we don't want to be like that either. We don't want to be like that either. We don't want to feel like we're going to cry at the drop of a hat. And honestly, I think that it's a trip. It's a trip. Chronic feelings of emptiness. This is from childhood neglect, likely, or at least in my case it is this like inability to understand yourself because you never were given the chance to reflect with your parents, or to have that support from your parents to allow you to feel comfortable enough to experience your life or to experience your emotions or to understand your emotions. And so if you never had the chance to do that, then it's like there's this emptiness that you're trying to fill because you never fully filled up inside. Maybe you don't feel like you're a whole person because, maybe you're not. It's crazy. It sucks, but maybe we're not. And I think everyone sort of has this too, though. Like, especially nowadays. I mean, now that we have such a disconnect from our growing our own food and a disconnect from our communities, that the progression in technology has created, or this progression in society, industrialized society, has occurred because we no longer everything's so much faster, and so it doesn't leave a lot of room for us to develop deep emotional connections to things, and so it just lends to this over encompassing feeling of emptiness because we don't attach to anything because we don't really have to. We have casual sex, we have fast food, we have TikTok. All of these things are just really fast, really quick, and don't require a lot of dedication, which has backfired in a lot of ways, and we're all sad. We're all sad, aren't we? This idea of short-lived stress-related paranoid thoughts or extreme dissociated symptoms, that can happen. That hasn't happened to me since I was a kid. However, I do find that I do dissociate, and I have to be very vigilant about this because it happens when I drive a lot, or if I'm really stressed out, or if I'm trying to have a conversation with someone about something that's bothered me. There is this thing that'll occur, and it happened a bunch of times today. I was on a call with a coach today, a relationship coach, just like looking for some help to set better boundaries and to, just fucking calm down essentially, and just like learn to chill out a little bit more. And I kept forgetting what I was trying to say. I kept forgetting what I was going to say. And my brain would just go completely blank, and I couldn't come up with the words, or I couldn't even, there was nothing. There was like nothing running through my mind except I'm trying to think of something and I don't know what I'm trying to think of. Like, where did it just go? I just had it. And it's like, it's this weird, it's just a total dissociation. And so that, for my experience, has occurred, but I've never, thought someone was after me. However, I have thought, I don't know, romantic relationships are often, where this is worst case scenario. You think your partner's cheating on you, or you think that they are secretly lying to you, or I don't know. It could be really anything. And so there are times where it can be triggered by, especially for women, because 75% of the people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder are women, and they say that BPD is actually diagnosed, or is theoretically diagnosable equally in men and women. However, men tend to not seek help, and men also tend to fall under the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. So that's, because they share some common feelings of unworthiness, essentially. So yeah. Anyway, so those are, as I'm reading through, those are the 9 criteria. So to be said to have had a full diagnosis, you have to have 5 out of these 9. And while I talked about before, earlier in the understanding of BPD, they thought that this was an incurable disease, essentially, that you just never got over it, that it never changed, and we're realizing that is absolutely not true, to the point where actually it has a pretty freaking good prognosis, and I am so happy. Even in the last 10 years, this has changed so much. When I first started doing research about this, when I was in 8th grade, they said, basically, you're fucked. You have it, you have it. You have it, good luck. Don't try and kill yourself, and don't become really addicted to drugs or something. And don't get into a bad relationship, so stuff like that. But now it's no way, listen to this. This is from borderlineintheact.org.au, so I think it's Australia, or Austria, I'm not sure. But it says, as most BPD diagnoses are not made until the individual is at least 18 years old, appropriate treatment usually begins in adulthood. Studies found that most patients with BPD improve with time. After 2 years, 1/4, so 25% of patients experience a remission, which is less than 2 symptoms for a period of 2 months or longer, of their BPD diagnosis. After 10 years, 91% achieved remission of at least 2 months, and 85% achieved remission for 12 months or longer. This is therefore the course of BPD is generally positive. This almost brings tears to my eyes, because honestly, when I first came across this information, they said, you have it. You have it, and it's just good luck, But now they're realizing, no, we we get better, and as we get older, it's kind of what happens. We're more able to see our emotions in a different light. Um, we're able to just calm down a little bit more, and we're able to see the bigger picture, and we can see our own patterns and recognize that, like, no, like, these are my cycles. I go through cycles, or I go through this back and forth thing, and it's not always like this all or nothing thing. I know that these emotions will go away. And if there's anything, and I've thought about this, if there's anything that I could have told my like 14-year-old self, is it goes away. Like, you don't necessarily need to react on all of your emotions because they go away. And like that's kind of a blessing to having BPD, because it's like your emotions come on so quickly and so strongly. And as my partner said, he's like, well, there's definitely no bullshit. You definitely don't just sit here and lie to me that you're not mad at me. He's like, I know when you're mad at me, and it's like, but then he's like, but they also go away really fast. They go away pretty fast. And it's like, they do. They take me maybe, like, I think sometimes if I'm upset, it'll be like 2 days, but it's a long time for me to be upset over something. I genuinely feel that I've been mistreated, if that's the case. But those are a couple like very distinct situations. But most of the time I'll get upset, and it'll kind of go from 0 to 100, and I'll go from being like, apparently people aren't like that. I don't think I necessarily knew that. I just knew that I get upset, and then it's like, if I don't feel understood, or if I don't feel heard, then I can get really upset. And I guess other people aren't necessarily like that. That there's more of a buildup, there's more of a slope as opposed to like a cliff. Um, and so that's the thing too, is like, it then they go away. So after like an hour, 2 hours or something, like, my emotions will have subsided, my adrenaline will have subsided, and I know that I can like revisit this. And that is one of the things that I think that we learn as we get older with BPD, is that we learn that we can't react to our emotions immediately. If someone says something that upsets us on a text message or something, like, I've learned, I turn my phone off, or I turn off the ringer for that person or something for a little while, so that I'm able to just kind of get grips on my shit again and not like react. And so that's one of the reasons that they say that a lot of the behavioral traits of BPD subside as you get older, is because we don't act out as much, because we've kind of learned, we've learned that how our brain works, we've learned how our body works and how we react to things. And so we're able to kind of like have a more cohesive, calmer outlook on things. But sometimes it's hard, man. Sometimes it's really fucking hard. And also, 10% of people in their 30s with BPD still commit suicide. So while there is a very good prognosis for this disorder, there's also a very high rate of people that kill themselves. And but once again, they say that that's primarily in their 30s. And once again, your 30s are where you start developing control over these things. So, so by the time you're in your 40s, like, the experience of BPD is so much different than the experience of when you're 22. And that just makes me feel so much better. I mean, once again, like, I'm just kind of, after I do this episode, I'm going to post it, and I'm going to work on writing an article about my Saturn return, and writing an Upwork thing on my Saturn return, talking about the experience that I've had over the last couple of years, and what I feel like I'm progressing into, the version of myself I'm progressing into, through this understanding of myself, this better understanding. But things get better, and it just continues to get better. I continue to get better, and you can continue to get better. That's it. That's what's up, man. You guys, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me as as I talk and I do this, as I sit and discuss my experience with it. Once again, in the coming couple weeks, I covered more in this episode than I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to have to like stop and do like a bit by bit idea of every one of these symptoms. But that's not necessarily the case. But I do want to progress onto some of the characteristics like CPTSD, and attachment issues and mood disorders that will progress, or that make up this sort of diagnosis. For anyone that's interested, if you guys have something you would like for me to cover, let me know. I'm so open, and I'm so excited to hear some more of your suggestions. I've had some really great ones in the past. And I've got a couple more that I'm going to be getting to, and I'll actually get back to you guys here in just the next 24 hours or so. So we all have a lot to look forward to there. If you guys are interested, you can go ahead and find me at Perceptionist Anonymous on Instagram. You can find me at sailor.awen, so sailor period AWEN, the Gaelic or the Celtic symbol for inspiration. You can find me on Instagram there. My Podbean is where I've switched over to my episode, my switched my podcast over from Anchor to Podbean, so perceptionist.podbean.com. Or you can email me at perceptionistanonymous@gmail.com. I look forward to continuing to work with you guys, and thank you so much for giving me the chance to cry on radio. Anyway, you guys, happy holidays. Have a beautiful night.